Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chai Side Chats, an exclusive interdisciplinary talk show featuring interviews with folks about creativity, the arts, healing, personal growth, spirituality, identity, mental emotional well-being, and all other things. I am your host, Aishwarya Subramanian, and I'm really excited to introduce my guests for today's episode of Chai Side Chats, co-presented by Creativity Awakening and Jayamangala. So today we have a duo of artists and arts educators and administrators based out of the DC, Maryland, Virginia area in the East Coast of the United States. Currently teaching at George Mason University, my first guest is a professional dancer, choreographer, and dance anthropologist who specializes in Indian and Middle Eastern dance. She brings a lifelong study of Hindi cinema and Kathak, or North Indian classical dance, to her work, and she has conducted research on the role of women and dance in Hindi cinema, through which she interviewed numerous Bollywood personalities. My second guest, in addition to being a trained Bharatanatyam dancer, has a background in arts programming, research, and socially accountable community engagement. In her previous job at the Strathmore, she curated audience experiences while expanding audience space using grassroots marketing. She's currently the CEO of Indian Dance Educators Association, and she also maintains a blog through which she tries to make sense of the world as a mom, dancer, administrator, and a lifelong learner. Please welcome Laurie Clark and Shruthi Mukund. Yay! So thank you both so much for being here. I'm really happy to have you together for an episode. I want to begin our chat today by talking about representation, because I feel like both of you have engaged with Indian dance and South Asian art forms in ways that I feel is helping to put them more on the map in mainstream America, so to speak. So my first question was when you first came into this field as arts educators and as an arts administrator, was that your goal to try and expand representation of Indian dance in American society and American arts culture?
Actually, when I moved to the US 20 years ago, I wasn't thinking about representation or anything. I just moved here having dance has always been a part of it's like my go-to, it's been the place that's I find my center. And I moved here, then I moved to Maryland, and I started working with my sister. We were creating, and then somewhere along the way I realized that there was this disconnect between what we were doing, who our audiences were, and where we were living. And as our dear friend Vijay calls it, the basement empires. And then that dance happened in dance teachers' basements. The performances happened mostly at temples or Indian associations, and it was thriving, but there was a serious disconnect between our students who were going to school in their towns and cities, and had this distinction between their identities as this Indian dancer versus being a student in school. And the only time it kind of coincided was when they did an Arangetam and they invited everybody, and everybody's like, "Oh, you actually do Indian dance?" That kind of exclamation. And so I felt that growing up, for them growing up here, it was this other experience. It was a part of finding their Indianness. But for me as an Indian dancer, an immigrant, brown, in this area, I felt like I had to always explain myself, and I went outside of the Indian community, talk about what Indian dance was, because people just looked at the costumes, and we only got invited as cultural representation. It's like Asian Pacific Heritage Month. Okay, let's call up all the Indian dancers in the area. But I'm like, but we're also artists, we're also dancers. And that's why idea was, I instinctly I got attracted to idea because they had a mission to make educate people and audiences here to say that we are more than just cultural representation. So through my work with IDEA and understanding where we are, who we are, and understanding how generations of Indians have lived in the UK or Australia, and how they've kind of integrated into the larger life than outside of the Indian community, that kind of inspired me to do the work I got to do, which was a very gradual thing. It was learning, and more you see and you're aware of what's happening outside, then things like granting and who gets the grants, how do they get the grants, who decides who gets the grants, like understanding those processes. I just showed up and I volunteered to be on various panels and grants, just so to learn what is happening outside of what we were doing. And obviously going back to school and learning nonprofit management and understanding arts administration also taught me all the gaps and how we as Indian dancers weren't even leveraging that system. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's still going. Lots of work to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, Lori, I'd love to hear your perspective as well, because I think in mainstream American education, we don't really see like Indian dance offered in any form. And I think it's great that you're offering that class,
Just what Shruthi said, it's the whole experience has been so gradual that I didn't even realize in the beginning, because I probably, I started as a teenager representing it, and it was just automatic to know that it needed to be represented, because of course I grew up in the world of Western dance with ballet and modern dance, and when I started it was just unknown, and I had a lot of teachers. I was lucky to have teachers who were interested in various world dances, as they would be called, or ethnic dances at that time. And because I never wanted to be a ballerina, but I love ballet, I've always had both feet in both worlds. And I think the advantage there is that I've been able to bring some of these world dance forms into that space. So not just George Mason, where I'm teaching now, that's one thing, but I also teach at Washington Ballet, and what's great about teaching there is that I get to expose Western dance students to this other world of dance. And by the way, many of them are not going to become professional ballet dancers. Very few people can. And so this opens the world of dance up to them, and they can see that there's other things that they might want to explore. And yeah, there was always this problem, Shruti, I don't know if you encountered this, but I would always encounter this, is that people would say, oh, you do that Indian belly dancing? And, I would just, you have to constantly explain that India, and I'm still, by the way, still explaining that India and the Middle East are not the same. That real level of basic explanation is still there, unfortunately. But in the university, of course, it's more of a general population, some dancers, some not dancers. And I strive at the very least to get the geography clear, and hopefully then they can learn something about the culture through the dance. And very often dance does represent culture or nation, so it's great.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's true that it's like, yes, the needle is moving forward, but at the same time there's different I guess sections of populations that are not as aware, so we kind of end up having similar conversations and explanations over and over again, because not everyone's on the same page. And I think that's sort of like pros and cons of diversity in general.
I think that also comes from the fact that in one way, like America does not have a Secretary of Culture or a Department of Culture, because they wanted the country to evolve in its own culture because being an immigrant nation or whatever. So it starts with good intentions, but that also makes it very it's a very interesting thing, because I don't think it's even like limited just to Indian dance and representation, right? It's just any type of dance that's not ballet, and any type of music.
Even what ballet is, people don't know. I mean, it's what people know about the arts in general is so limited. But forget it. In the United States, that is a huge problem. We stopped teaching geography a long time ago, and even cultural studies haven't been valued for a long time. And it's so unfortunate. If they started in elementary school, imagine we wouldn't have that discussion.
Yeah, and also it kind of, because there's also this big divide between what's entertainment and what's art and culture, and this whole divide between nonprofit and entertainment, and like it's like, oh, anything that's of great value and art should be a nonprofit, because like we should all be starving artists, but then you can repeat the same word and be an entertainer and get paid millions. So there's that divide. It's just, and also I think in some ways it is the same case in India today, with the whole divide between like Bollywood and music and those kind of like businesses versus like the dancers, the culture, the classical dancers. They don't get that kind of recognition. They don't get ad placements like that. They're not making the millions, but they're the keepers of the culture. But then the movies and even if they hold a cricket bat, they become like heroes in the country. So
Can I say something about that? Because you're so right. But here's where I think the needle has moved forward, if I'm using that correctly. This is where I think we've come ahead a little bit, is that I see now, like, and I wonder if it's not an impulse from Indian dancers in America. Is I used to be so frustrated in the beginning that, I mean, of course you pay a ton for classes, but Indian dancers would never charge for performances. And I'd be like, you should charge. You need to charge. And if a museum asks you to perform, you need to charge. All the vendors are charging. All of the street sweepers are charging, and they're asking the artists for free. Look at the Cherry Blossom Festival. Everyone dances for free. They shouldn't. The city is making money from this. And you're not going to get exposure. Exposure is bullshit. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
But it's true. And people try to convince you. And for years, Indian artists, like a lot of like decent housewives, they didn't want to look like they were making their living from dancing. And they were afraid to charge, or they would be, financially secure maybe. So they would feel like it looks better to do it for charity or something. And now finally, I think over the years, people they're charging. Like now there's a lot more awareness of that. And I think a lot of that started here from Indian dancers here, seeing how the system was working. And then I think in India, was impulse from the classical dancers there too, to start charging more and to get paid. Now it's not perfect by any means. Like nobody's getting paid what they deserve, for all the sacrifice. But I think finally, there's awareness about getting grant money, getting these funds that you need to continue the culture. So finally, I do think that there's progress in that area.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, our conversation that we've been having about just like, arts and getting paid for it, and like how to like brand yourself, how to market yourself. I feel like those are all questions that are coming in. And one of my curiosities that I wanted to talk to both of you about is, when we're presenting Indian dance to audiences or to students, when we're in educational spaces, like how do we do that? How do we package it, or, like share about it in a way that people actually understand it? And alternatively, is it important for everyone to understand every single bit of what's happening in the art form? Because there's so many intricacies, there's so many different layers to it, that I think that even for practitioners who have been in the field, that's kind of impossible. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
So the Ragamala Dance Company is probably one of the most prominent Indian dance companies because of multiple reasons. I mean, they have found a way to work the system to their advantage, and also at the same time do Bharatanatyam, and they've gotten awesome opportunities to perform kind of all across the country. And a lot of their work, from what I have seen or what I've understood of like their work, is they have learned how to communicate it with people who don't know anything about Indian dance. And it's not like any of their dancing is, it's not like they're doing extremely innovative dancing. They're presenting a varnam, they're presenting a thing, but the way they're communicating that is what has changed for them, right? Versus the other companies who not to take away from anybody's artistry, but it's just the way you're kind of communicating that to somebody who doesn't know what you do. It is just really fascinating how the communication makes the difference. So like even when we go perform at street festivals, before we perform, like I have the kids go up on stage or whoever's performing, like I take like just a couple minutes before the dance to say, look, this is a very ancient a dance form. It's an artistic dance form. Like these students learn from the age of 5 that they're growing into these dancers. It's a lifelong learning process. There are things there's a vocabulary, there's a grammar. It's not just like random movements. Like, just giving people, prefacing that to the audience before you actually do anything just changes the way they're looking at it.
We think about culture every day, maybe because that's our interest, that's our profession, but other people don't. And so you have to kind of get into their mind, which is difficult. It's not important to them like it is to us, or they don't realize why it should be important to them. And I think explaining maybe why culture is important in general is another way in.
Yeah, no, culture is, I think it's so widespread and at the same time not on everyone's minds or at the forefront of their minds. And so, since we were talking about just how to, like Shruthi, you had mentioned Ragamala and like just, thinking about organizations or artists who have managed to like break out into the scene and make Indian dance a little bit more out there and popular. I'm curious, like, what are some things that they're probably doing that we could learn from or that we could adopt? Like, what are things that they're probably keeping in mind in terms of the audience or in terms of how they're communicating the art form, which is very similar to what other people in the country are doing, but in different ways that they're able to get the resources, they're able to get the opportunities that they have been getting.
So, I mean, if you take Ragamala as a case study, they are based in Minnesota. So it is like the Minnesota Arts Council is extremely invested in the community and to keep arts alive in the community. And the number of practitioners of like diverse descents are much lower, right, than if you were to take California or the DC metro area. So here, every zip code has at least minimum 2 dance teachers, right? And there's enough population to teach them. So the teaching business is flourishing here. That's not the problem. But the problem is that next step is that Indian dance, they're schools, they're not companies. So the distinction is that Ragamala, Prakriti Dance, or Spilling Ink, they're all dance companies. The rest of them are schools. So what that means that they have students who are like in the ballet world, like they call the pre-professionals. So they come up to the pre-professional stage, then they do an arrangetum, then they all go to college. So nobody really is practicing dance for the rest of their lives like a professional dance company does in the alternate dance world, right? So you have all these other dancers who are pre-professionals, then they get into the professional world, means they're dancing every day and that's their job. How many the Indian dance companies in our area do that? Very few, right? Because they all have like multiple lives. And also a lot of the dance teachers, like Laurie was mentioning, have spouses who are, so this is also something they're doing to keep their culture dance alive, but they don't necessarily want to tour with it. They're not like hiring dancers and they're not paying their dancers. So that's the other distinction between the dance company and the school. Like the school, you have senior students, you're not really paying them, but you're preparing them to be professional dancers, but you're not giving them the money. So that's what Dance USA also actually defines a dance company, is where you're paying your dancers versus they're your students. That's like the distinction they use, Dance USA does. So I think that's the first difference between a Ragamala than everybody else, right? Because I mean, not everybody else. There's so many other dance companies. I mean, it's just become, because they're so prominent that it's easy to talk about them as a dance company. There are a few others across the country, and that's the first difference. The second difference is that they have spent the time and energy to understand how dance companies work in the US versus outside of the entire Indian like diaspora, right? So the Ragamala has an agent. They go to the APAP, the Association for Performing Arts Presenters. They've been there at the present, they've spent that time and money invested in showing up at the conference, getting their agent, pitching their product, just like all other dance companies in the area are doing, in the country are doing. That's the second thing. Then they have learned how to get all the grants, learned how to speak, right? To get that whole conversion of how to write the proposal, how to get the grant, what is it that makes, what is that gap of learning, right? What is it that we do in our classical world, but that will not be understood unless we take that extra effort to make them understand. I have seen proposals when I've sat on panels where there have been Indian artists, whether dancing, music, visual artists, it'll be like, Pandit, somebody is my teacher and they're renowned. So who is Pandit? Who is thing? Here, what does that matter, right? I mean, how are you going to communicate the value of this revered guru without, yes, okay, you don't have to be basic enough to, you can still refer to them as Pandit in the application, but say he's a renowned person, whatever, right? Understanding that nobody's going to assume that nobody knows anything. That's how those applications have to be written. So that's the other thing. Because you think you will learn from the best guru in India or whatever, doesn't mean people here are going to know the guru or understand that. So those kind of it's and as simple as these things sound, that really makes the difference, And when you see these sitting on panels, actually, I encourage everybody to try sitting on it, because that really opens your eyes how things work, and how even it doesn't even have to be an Indian dancer, right? Even I remember this other artist, it was some sort of visual artist, just the way they communicated their work, nobody got it. Nobody got the relevance of that work or their need of their presence or why they needed the money. So that kind of education, I think, will just help all of us kind of slowly start bridging that gap.
One advantage I really think is, of course, Indian Americans are extremely affluent and extremely well-educated. It's an amazing group of immigrants to the United States that has contributed a lot. And from the beginning, Indian Americans have made inroads in local and national politics, and now we see the result, right? We have we have Kamala Harris.
Kamala,
my president, and but we see those changes, and I think that's the advantage within the specifically within the Indian American community, is that they've been able to make those inroads because of the education and affluence. And like you said, getting on panels and really learning that. And a lot of other groups haven't done that. And so their culture is going to it's going to fall behind. It's going to take a lot longer to come forward. I mean, if you look at Arab Americans, for example, because they're from so many different countries and cultures, maybe they don't come together as a coalition, but they've had a much more difficult time bringing their culture forward or making their case, whether it's political or artistic or whatever. And again, it's a whole different background, but this is where Indian Americans have a definite advantage here, and it's good. It's great. It can serve as a model for other people to bring their culture forward, because many other groups are just much less organized in their approach. So I do think there's hope for it. And I wonder, this is kind of a question, but I'm wondering if the whole pandemic has made people realize how much they do need culture in their life. Classical, popular, everything.
I think that's I think people are missing the live interaction, but also there's so much content online, like famous dancers, singers, everybody is giving it away for free. And that's the other thing we'll have to combat with post-pandemic. It's like, okay, yes, that's great. Initially, the world needed it, so you did it, or you wanted to feel good, you wanted to practice, and then you have all these things, but then what? Like, how are you going to sustain that? You can sustain that, and even going back past like vaccinations, we're not going to immediately go back into prosceniums with like 500 people. There's no way that's happening. So how are you going to help these artists make the money, sustain their lives, right? And going back to the other point of like, dance and this whole thing, the transition and the curve for dancers here, the thing that for me, I always feel like, I mean, I alone obviously can't fix this situation because it's a much larger than me situation, but it's this whole thing of not having a pipeline for Indian dancers because there aren't enough dance companies. There's no, like, how many people who don't have the spouse, who don't have that family support, whose mother is not a dance teacher, can become a dancer, like choose to become a dancer to sustain it. Right? I mean, that is what is baffling because then, I mean, yes, okay, everybody's going to college, but as much as the Indian American overall diaspora is affluent, it isn't true of every Indian American. And like this whole, what is in it for them to even, like I personally know of like 2 people who wanted to be professional dancers, but couldn't make it.
It's a good question. I don't know if there's an answer for that question. It's very difficult. I mean, it's hard for anyone to become a professional dancer anyway, right? I mean, even with advantages. As somebody who is a professional dancer, and I didn't have advantages towards that. I had to work really hard to do that. And actually, for me, being a professional dancer was fine up until this year. Like all of a sudden it's like, even in economic downturns and stuff, I would always have work. I was always able to dance. I've been able to do that. And like I said, it wasn't easy to, it's not an easy profession to go into anywhere in the world or at any time. But of course, right now, you bring up a good point because it's even for somebody who doesn't have ready-made opportunities, it's even more difficult now. I can't imagine somebody deciding to go into this field right now. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now, since we're sort of talking about what art, like presenting art might look like in a post-COVID world. I mean, I say post-COVID, but who knows when that's going to be, right? Like, where do you both see the evolution of Indian dance specifically in the future as we kind of come out of this pandemic or even beyond that? Like, whether it's representation, whether it's like people valuing their art form, people charging more for performances, how we are communicating about, the art form. Where are we headed, do you think?
I think, Shruthi, you made a point before, and I think that this may be a moment of change in subject matter for people. It's been happening over time. Like I've noticed a lot of the college performances for all of the, like the Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi teams and stuff. They would do these mini dramas on different subject matters, like maybe the Gulf War. I remember there was one. There's like all these different subjects coming to fore. So yeah, I don't think the traditional is ever going to disappear. But as you said, even when we were growing up and learning about like, what does it mean? And I think Chandra Lekha brought this up many, many years ago. What does it mean to you, about Krishna stealing butter? Like, what's the modern relevance of that? And I think that the stress of the pandemic time might make people question that more, or make traditional artists more willing to accept new themes because in order to keep the art form alive, it's going to take a lot of innovation. We've all had to be innovative in this time period, and I think it's going to allow more innovative or relevant material in.
Yeah, I think thematically, definitely they will people are already like online, like dancers have been exploring different themes in this past year. And I think the other biggest change other than thematically would be presentation. Like now they've been already multiple virtual conferences, so barrier to entry reduces, so you can have artists in the US sitting in on a conference in India, things like that, right? Which normally in normal times you would have had to travel to India to be a part of the Natikala conference or whatever. Right now there's this that one barrier has been removed because people have understood how to present things in the virtual world, how to get people involved, because every organization wants to stay relevant too, right? So bringing artists together will be easier in the virtual world. So, and I think also post-COVID, there will become this thing where the virtual screening or virtual thing will be, it won't be a matter of either or, it will be and. There'll be a virtual component to your live performance, whatever that virtual component could be, because people have understood the power of bringing far more people together who are not geographically connected. So I think that people will start leveraging far more and finding a way to bring artists and things together.
I want to transition into our experiential activity for today. So, one of my intentions for this show is to bring together people who are doing interdisciplinary work in some way, and it doesn't always fit into boxes very neatly, which is unfortunately how society conceptualizes a lot these days. So, instead of continuing to talk more about, thinking about your roles, right? Dance anthropologist, arts administrator. I feel like those are very loaded words. Those are very heavy words. Even me as an expressive arts therapist, I'm like, what does that really mean, right? So I want to invite us to just kind of reflect on what it is that we do. What is the essence of the work that we do, in our respective roles? And especially because I imagine we get this question a lot. And so you can use an art form or art modality of your choice. It can be dance or movement. It can be music, poetry, spoken word, visual art, whatever you're feeling drawn to at the moment. Just a prompt to respond to is, how might you share the essence of the work that you do as an artist? And other ways to interpret this, or other questions to think about, could be what inspires you, what drives you, and what keeps you going, and what keeps your passion and creativity running.
The video of me spinning is like the best representation of everything in my life. It for the good and bad.
Yeah. What does the spinning represent for you?
Ordered chaos, maybe. Centrifugal force. Yeah, I mean, I love spinning as a movement, actually, in every dance form. And so, yeah, it definitely has a lot of meaning for me, and I'm not sure if I can define all of it, but definitely that's one.
Yeah, that's great.
So I think of myself as a bridge, because I feel like that's the kind of role I play wherever I go. In a lot of rooms, I'm the only brown person, even in arts administration, when I show up at like places where I'm brown, and then not only am I brown, I'm an immigrant brown. I wasn't born here. So I'm bridging that. Then I feel like even at IDEA, like all the founder members, they came here, they founded IDEA for a reason that was relevant to them. But then I feel like I'm the bridge taking it to the next generation who need to find a reason why they need to be a part of IDEA, and why they need to continue with IDEA, and why it should be relevant to them, which is like what I keep trying to seek with the second generation of dancers, and how to get them a streamline and like a pipeline and things like that. Yes. Then I also feel like I'm kind of finding all the gaps in bridging to like help professional dancers. So that's the other way I bridge So yeah, that's and it's funny, even in my family, whenever they fight, I'm the bridge for everybody. So for my children and husband.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how our roles in our careers and professional lives sometimes can mirror family relationships too. I mean, that's a whole different topic, but just as a therapist, it's very interesting to me. So, well, thank you both so much for, being on this episode of Chai Side Chats. I've really, really loved the conversations, rich conversations that we've had today. And just hope that your creativity will continue to awaken, flow, and find expression in the many ways through the work that you do. So thank you so much for being here. Hello, viewers. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Chai Side Chats. Please do like, share, and subscribe to the Creativity Awakening YouTube channel for regular updates on our videos. Episodes for Chai Side Chats premiere every 2 weeks, so stay tuned for our next one coming soon.